I'm sitting with Laura Otten. We've just completed the Board Executive Director Relationship Workshop as part of the Dodge Board Leadership Series. And I was hoping that you could summarize a process that a board might use to look at that relationship and hopefully improve it.
Sure. I think that, as we did in the workshop, and what we heard loudly and clearly is that one of the biggest struggles in this relationship is that people believe that the relationship between the executive director and the board is rather ambiguous. We heard that term again and again today, that it's ambiguous, it's ambiguous. And my response is it's not ambiguous in reality. It's ambiguous in the way we've interpreted it or the way we think we're supposed to do it. So I think what has to happen is that the board and the executive director have to sit down and talk about the nature of their tasks and where there is agreement as to what is the executive director's and what is the board's, and where there seems to be some overstepping of boundaries or lack of clarity, to talk about what it is. So one of the things that we used in the workshop is a table that says, here's the board's responsibility in this area, here's what the executive director is supposed to be doing in this area. And so I think that table is a good starting point for discussion for boards and executive directors to have, so long as they understand that this is a conversation for discovery purposes and understanding purposes, and not a conversation for pointing blame or for punitive purposes, but really to peel back the layers of the relationship and say, this is where we're performing really well. When it comes to accountability, the board really understands where and to whom and to what it's accountable. The executive director really understands to whom and to what he or she is accountable, and we're mutually supporting that. We've got great clarity there. In decision making, you know what? We don't have such great clarity, and sometimes the board steps over and does the executive directors, and sometimes vice versa. So to go down that list of key areas of responsibility, and for the board to say, aha, I get what is our responsibility, and you know what? I think we've been doing too much of the executive director's responsibility, or the executive director to say, no, I think you've been doing fine, maybe this is what we need to do. So to have that very frank, honest conversation about where the line has in people's mind been ambiguous, and trying to really clarify it, because for the most part it isn't a tightrope. It is a very clear line, and we can make that line wider and clearer or brighter, whatever the right way of talking about that is, if we have that respectful mutual conversation. The next thing is to really look at that partnership. One of the things that we talked about today is that this is really a partnership. The relationship between the executive director and the board is a partnership of slight unequals, as I've said throughout this series, but it's a partnership. And there are some key characteristics. We identified 11 key characteristics of a strong, healthy partnership. I think the board and the executive director should once again have that conversation, again, in the realm of discovery and understanding, not punitive. Where are we strong in our relationship, in our partnership? Where do we need some work? Where do we have to say, oh, right, we never even thought about that? And really clarify what the relationship has been doing well, where the relationship needs to do some more work. And then the third thing that we talked about in the workshop, which I think is really helpful because it's taking it down to a much more practical level, if you will. There's a certain, one might argue, a certain theoretical, philosophical component to evaluating the strength of the partnership. But the third component that we did was to talk about the creation of reciprocal agreements, which really says, okay, I as the executive director, this is what I am going to do, and in return I expect the board to do this, this, and this. And then the board says, this is what I'm going to do, or we're going to do, and in response we expect the executive director to do this, this, and this. So it's really specifying the nature of that partnership and what those reciprocal obligations, responsibilities are. And to do that with the executive director and the full board, the executive director and the board president, the executive director and each committee chair, and as one of the participants suggested, even though it wasn't part of this particular content, a very, very good point to talk about a reciprocal agreement amongst board members. That we have that same need. If I, as an individual board member, are going to do X, then I am expecting the reciprocal action from the rest of my board. So doing that last piece of creating these reciprocal agreements, I think is a really practical way of saying, okay, this is what we want to do, this is how we're going to achieve it.